Our resurrection story this morning comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, verses 36 to 48. And it is the next scene after a story we shared last week, and you'll see how they tie together along the way. While the two followers were telling this, Jesus himself stood right in the middle of them and said, "Peace be with you." They were fearful and terrified and thought they were seeing a ghost. But Jesus said, "Why are you troubled? Why do you doubt what you see? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I, myself. Touch me and see, because a ghost does not have a living body as you see I have." And after Jesus said this, he showed them his hands and feet, while they still could not believe it, because they were amazed and happy. Jesus said to them, "Do you have any food here?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish. While the followers watched, Jesus took the fish and ate it. And he said to them, "Remember when I was with you before? I said that everything written about me must happen. Everything in the law of Moses, the book of the prophets, and the Psalms." And then Jesus opened their minds so they could understand the scriptures. He said to them, "It is written that the Christ would suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, and that a change of hearts and lives and forgiveness of sins would be preached in his name to all the nations, starting at Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We've heard much of this story before, in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, but now it's from a slightly different perspective. As Luke tells the story, he's piecing it together from the memories shared with him later. So let's take a look at the highlights of those memories that were retained. Jesus appearing in the middle of them, suddenly it says, and Jesus' first words offered them peace. Peace is such an important gift, and the disciples who received it that night treasured it. So that's one of the things they remembered. In fact, we still remember it as we give the peace to one another in worship every Sunday. Some of them were afraid they were seeing a ghost. Again, no matter how many people saw Jesus, they seemed to be taken by surprise every time. And they have to think it through before they recognize who he is. Well, if you've ever been taken by surprise, you know what that feels like. I'm pretty sure at least 2 or 3 of you have somewhere along the way appeared right in front of me when I wasn't expecting you, and I probably either jumped or screamed or both. So you can understand their reactions of surprise. Jesus caught them off guard like that. Touch is offered. Touch is an important thing, but in this case, Jesus is using it to prove that he is the real thing by letting them touch him. And he takes it a step further. He eats a piece of fish. I'm guessing that was to say ghosts don't eat, but this is a real body. I can eat this piece of fish. But I want you to also think about how important fish is as a symbol. Some of the men were fishermen before, so fish was their living before Jesus appeared on the scene. They've eaten fish together as teacher and disciples on many occasions. One of the miraculous feedings involved a few fish shared by a little boy from his lunch. And fish are going to be an ongoing symbol for followers of Christ. And Jesus reminds them of the scriptures and how he fulfills them. That teaching aspect is an important part of who he's been to them, and helping them understand where he is fulfilling the Old Testament scriptures that were the scriptures of their day, the law and the prophets and the writings. He's just done this with the two on the road to Emmaus. That was last week's story. And Luke records them as being present in the room now when Jesus appears to them. They've just finished telling their story. Jesus reminds them again that he is the fulfillment of all these things in the Scripture, that he is then the Messiah, the new covenant that God is making with his people. He tells them what he has just accomplished and what they are to do next, and that's an important piece. He has suffered death, and he did rise in 3 days. Was it for nothing? No. It had a purpose. First, that their hearts and their lives would be changed, and boy, would they. But second, that they would be witnesses to these things to the rest of the world, and they would become that. And many hearts and lives have been changed ever since because of their testimony and their teachings. And that's still the mission today, that hearts and lives would be changed because of the message and the sacrifice and the new hope found in Jesus Christ. Today we're looking for hope in the resurrection and other scriptures. When Jesus died, those disciples felt lost. They didn't know what to do next. They were discouraged. Perhaps they were ready to give up. Peter at times just wanted to go back to fishing because that's what he knew best and that's where his comfort zone was. Don't you feel that way sometimes? When things get discouraging, you just want to go back to what you know. That's human nature. Jesus appears to them at various times offering peace, encouraging them, giving them a purpose, a job to do, and giving them hope that life goes on. They're important to the continuation of what Jesus began. They need to know that Jesus has not abandoned them. Their sacrifices were not in vain. God is still with them, and God will equip and empower them. I think these themes keep appearing in the stories about Jesus' resurrection appearances, because that's the hope that we need too. So here's what I think we need to remember. We have a purpose and a mission. Life does continue despite the changes and the challenges that we face. Jesus has not abandoned us, but is right here with us, even now. Our sacrifices are not in vain, and neither was his. God with us will still equip and empower us to continue the work of God's Son, Jesus. If the disciples think back to the stories that Jesus told them over the past 3 years, they will notice that Jesus had been preparing them for this day. And I think that's part of why he appears to them, to remind them that they are ready. He's already trained them with what they need. Jesus has been giving them hope and promising to be with them. He's cared for them. They're not lost in his eyes, and they will find their place if they remain in him, and so will we. Fish is one part of that story and one part of their lives. But the lectionary readings today that I've hinted at throughout this service talk about another animal, about sheep. So we're going to talk about sheep for a minute. These disciples grew up on and worshiped often using the Psalms. When Jesus told them the story earlier of the lost sheep, the shepherd leaving the others to go and find it, what we know as Psalm 23 may have come to their minds because they would have known it too. When we read it together today, perhaps you noticed some significant tasks of the shepherd. The shepherd provides for the sheep, protects them, guides them along the path, cares for them in every way. Jesus had been that kind of shepherd for these disciples for 3 years as their teacher. They have been the sheep. But now the time is coming soon when they must become shepherds. story changes. They will have to care for the sheep and the lambs that Jesus will show to them. In just a couple more Sundays, we're going to get to that conversation between Jesus and Peter when he's told to feed and tend the sheep. Here's another classic teaching that Jesus would have spoken to them and to the crowds around him earlier in his ministry. We know it as the Good Shepherd. Jesus said, "I am the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd gives his life for the sheep. A hired hand isn't a shepherd and doesn't own the sheep. When he sees a wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and quickly runs away. So the wolf drags the sheep away and scatters the flock. The hired hand is concerned about what he's going to get paid and not about the sheep. I am the Good Shepherd. I know my sheep as the Father knows me. My sheep know me as I know the Father. So I give my life for my sheep. I also have other sheep that are not from this pen, and I must lead them. They too will respond to my voice. So they will be one flock with one shepherd. The Father loves me because I give my life in order to take it back again. No one takes my life from me. I give it my life of my own free will. I have the authority to give my life, and I have the authority to take my life back again. This is what the Father has ordered me to do." Now the disciples had heard and studied the words of the prophets in the synagogue, so when they heard Jesus speaking those words, maybe some of those qualities of the Good Shepherd they recognized as his reference to the prophet Ezekiel in what we know as chapter 34. Ezekiel was warning religious leaders of his day that they become more concerned with themselves than with God's people. They hadn't been providing for or protecting them. They hadn't healed them or brought back the strays. That's likely what Jesus was hinting at in his own day, when he said that the hired hand doesn't really care for the sheep, only about his own pay. He runs away and abandons the sheep when the wolves come. Ezekiel shared God's concern that the sheep have been scattered. Others have spoken that same concern for God's people, but they were like sheep without a shepherd. In Ezekiel, God promised to search for the sheep himself, to be their shepherd, to tend and to feed them, to look for the lost and tend the sick. God promised one future shepherd to care for them. When Jesus preached to the crowds, he referred to them as being like sheep without a shepherd, and now he had promised to be that good shepherd for them, the one who would lay down even his life for the sheep. And that's what Jesus did on the cross. These are the kinds of things that Jesus was reminding them that night when he appeared so late on the first Easter. That he had suffered for them, that he gave up his life that they might be forgiven, that he rose from the dead and that they might have new life. This is the hope we are called to hold fast in our hearts. This is the hope we are called to share with others. There are times when we feel like lost sheep, just as the disciples did that first Easter evening. Many of you have experienced loss in so many ways. Lost jobs, lost friends, lost loved ones, lost homes, lost churches, lost health, lost benefits, lost income, lost staff, lost hope sometimes. But I'm asking you not to focus on the loss. Instead, I'm asking you to focus on the one who offers you life. I can't tell you what the future will hold for any one of us. I can tell you that I personally trust the Good Shepherd. That he's still with us, still provides and protects, still guides and heals, still cares, and still forgives. I have chosen to put my own hope in the risen Lord, who may not seem to be visible standing in our midst, but who is here offering peace and giving us a purpose. In a couple of weeks, as I said, our gospel lesson will include that conversation between Peter and Jesus. Since we are Jesus' hands and feet in the world today, sometimes we are the ones that Jesus will send out to seek the lost, to tend the lame, to care for the lambs and to feed the sheep. As Jesus' disciples today, we are called to become shepherds ourselves. This is the purpose Jesus has for us, to continue his work. And we can fulfill it because we are redeemed, equipped and empowered by a God who is still with us each and every day. There is the source of our hope. The peace of Christ be with you.